Addictions: pride, laziness, gluttony, lust, greed. Since sin entered the world, human beings have been susceptible to being dominated by these vices. Each one of us has them, and we have all fallen into them. That's why countless thinkers throughout human history have discussed them. Addictions awaken our most irrational side, seduce us, cloud our understanding, and incline our appetite towards the basest passions that humans possess. They even subdue reason, making you try to convince yourself that the addiction is something good, or at least not as bad as one might expect. As you can already perceive, Stoicism stands out as one of the most critical doctrines regarding vices. The Stoics believe that vices negate human reason and freedom, turning the addicted person into something akin to an animal subservient to their instincts and desires. Remember that historical philosophy is nothing more than an unceasing cultivation of virtue, and virtue is nothing less than the rational habit that distances us from vice and leads us to a full and happy life. As you may have experienced, addiction makes us tremendously unhappy. It seems to satisfy us completely, but this satisfaction is fleeting and temporary. When it fades, it leaves only suffering, anguish, and unhappiness. It appears that addiction completes and satiates us, but in reality, all it does is empty us and leave a wound in the soul that only virtue can heal. Marcus Aurelius said that addiction is its own punishment and lies in its own destruction. Seneca added that addiction is the most powerful enemy one can face, but virtue is the best defense against it. In this video, I will try to help you become the master of yourself, to control addictions, and ultimately to become more virtuous and happy. To do this, I will divide the video into two parts. First, I will explain what addiction consists of from a historical perspective. Then, I will provide 10 pieces of advice to combat addiction through virtue. According to Stoicism, addiction is morally incorrect and harmful behavior for the person committing it. It is an affliction of the soul that leans toward rational appetite, distorts judgment, causes suffering, and undermines inner peace and serenity. Examples of well-known vices are vanity, anger, fear, lust, greed, and many others. Marcus Aurelius explains well what these deviations of the soul consist of and says the following: ignorance is the first and greatest vice, followed by lack of self-mastery. Addiction is primarily the result of a judgment error derived from a flawed exercise of the virtue of wisdom. When we fall prey to addiction, our understanding takes two alternatives. It either identifies as good what is truly bad or recognizes it as bad and tries to convince itself that it is good. In both cases, the result is the same: understanding becomes clouded, expressing error with bent understanding and reason, and allowing pleasure and desire to roam freely. Transient pleasure is favored over true happiness, and one becomes a prisoner of irrational and selfish impulses. Surrendering to addiction means forsaking reason that makes us human and becoming enslaved by our passions, characteristics of animals. In addition to making us more animal-like, addiction makes us dependent and manipulable, like slaves to our passions, nullifying our freedom and rendering us incapable of choosing between actions. Prisoners of vice, others can do whatever they want with us, easily manipulating our weaknesses. Hence, Marco Aurelio claims that, after the error of ignorance, the error of lack of self-mastery lies within addiction. Reason becomes confused and gives way to pleasure, losing all ability to control passions and direct them toward virtue. Desire and virtue, as history would say, are incompatible. Therefore, vices that prioritize desires and distance us from virtue detach us from both serenity and the happy life, the ends toward which every human should aim. However, falling into vice should not be seen as falling into an incorrigible error from which we cannot escape. On the contrary, as Seneca stated, the best medicine for addiction is virtue. Therefore, according to Stoicism, it's crucial to fight every day to practice virtue. We must strive to be more rational, serene, renounce vices gradually, and gain self-mastery. This is a challenging task, but it corresponds to such a grand goal as true happiness. If complete happiness were easy to attain, it wouldn't be so wonderful or valuable. If you think as the philosophers did, you likely agree with these ideas. However, you might wonder, while I agree with this, what concrete steps can I take to overcome vices in my daily life? Where should I start? This is what I'll address in the second part of this video, where I'll provide you with advice to combat the tyranny of vices and cultivate virtue. Rule number 1, know yourself. To fight against something, first you need to know what you're fighting against. Always take the time to carefully consider. What are your weaknesses and vices? Deep down, we're all aware of what they are. Our altered hearts point us to the cause of our turmoil and unhappiness. Greed, lust, gluttony, and selfishness. It's crucial to recognize what they are and have a clear understanding of what we want to combat. Rule number 2, visualize that this is a long and challenging path. Overcoming vices is a highly complicated task because they are deeply rooted in our hearts. Keep in mind that during the journey, you're likely to fall back into them, and that's perfectly natural. The important thing is not to give up and always return to the fight to abandon them. If you keep trying, surely a day will come when you have overcome them completely. Rule number 3, determine your motivation. Think about the valuable reasons that led you to want to abandon the vice. The main reason is to be happier, but there will be other personal motives for each individual. Saving money, taking care of health, improving relationships, etc. Always keep this in mind, especially in difficult moments. And don't forget that these reasons are infinitely more valuable and deserving of your attention than the vices you've fallen into. Rule number 4, set realistic goals. Define a goal that is challenging but achievable, not too easy but also not impossible. It's important that you realize that overcoming the vice will require effort, but it's also essential to believe that you'll be capable of achieving it. Rule number 5, start progressively. If you're deeply involved in the particular vice, start little by little. It's not necessary to quit it all at once. You can set progressive goals each day, week, or month. Like ants building up grain by grain to make a mountain. As Marcus Aurelius said, virtue is not something acquired overnight, it's the result of constant work in controlling vices. Rule number 6, avoid risky situations. If you know your vices and weaknesses and are determined to overcome them, avoid situations that could lead you to fall back into those vices. This might require modifying certain habits in your life and changing your environment to avoid temptations. Be brave and always remember that every sacrifice is worth it. Distance yourself from those who encourage the vice. Those who lead you to vice don't have your best interests at heart. Rule number 7, seek help. No one can solve all their problems alone. Turning to others can be very helpful. You can find support from family, friends, philosophers, professionals, and others who have faced the same vice. Rule number 8, internalize the difference between momentary pleasure and true satisfaction. As you progress in overcoming the vice, you'll notice a huge difference between the fleeting pleasure that vices provide and the deep satisfaction that comes from conquering them through virtue. The complete satisfaction that arises from overcoming vices with virtue brings infinitely more joy and inner serenity. Rule number 9, reflect on the harm you cause to yourself and others. When we fall into vices, we often downplay the harm or believe it doesn't truly exist. However, vices cause deep wounds in the soul and pave the way for unhappiness and misfortune. This displays a lack of self-love, as we inflict harm upon ourselves and deny the good. Additionally, vices inevitably affect those around us, either by sharing them, encouraging others to engage in them, or tolerating them in others. Rule number 10, think about the historical doctrine on vice control. You have any vices that haunt you and you can't overcome? I await your response in the comments. I hope this video helps you realize the harm vices cause to ourselves and those around us, as well as the need to overcome them. I also hope that sharing these tools for overcoming vices has been helpful. Remember that your serenity and true happiness are at stake. Here are 2 videos full of historical wisdom that you'll certainly enjoy. Until next time.